Hi guys, it's Carrie Eink.
And Sarah Norris.
Today we're going to talk about emotions. We know that emotions stem from a lot of different experiences, past experiences, and a lot of different psychological bases in the brain. But what we're going to talk about specifically today is how SPD and emotions relate.
So yeah, looking at the relationship of how you perceive your sensations and how we make those steps to what that means. What's the meaning behind those sensations? So we touched on this last week when we talked about interoception and how those internal sensations of what's going on with your organs can tell you a lot of different things about what you're feeling, and how for some people that can be really confusing at times. So we're going to take it another step further and delve into the world of emotions a little bit deeper when it comes to multisensory processing. So not just those internal sensations, but figuring out what's going on internally as well as externally, and figuring out the why behind why you're feeling what you're feeling and what it might mean.
Yeah, so I'll start out. I think it might be helpful to talk about a case experience. Thinking about a client that I recently had who's under-responsive kind of across the board, specifically related to his movement sensations, touch sensations, and the interoceptive sensations. And we started talking about emotions, and I realized that he's an adolescent, and thinking about his emotions, he was going on different equipment in the gym, and I was asking him, how does that make you feel? Is that fun? Is it scary? And it was just kind of a blank look from him. And he looked at his mom, and she said, well, he's kind of always looked to me to tell him, for him, what it feels like. And that gave me such good insight into, if you're not getting those signals from your interoceptive senses, nothing's telling you in your stomach that you're feeling nervous, nothing's telling you that you're feeling joy, your touch senses aren't giving you quite correct feedback, your movement senses aren't, it would be really hard to understand if it's joyful or if it's unpleasant. And so just an example of how he uses his environment and other people around him to define the emotional experience for him.
And I talk with parents when I see this in the children that I work with, of just always needing a mirror, needing somebody else to reflect what they're experiencing. So if they did something that was really big and a big accomplishment for them, they look to their parents to have that sense of pride, that big response of, wow, you did it, and then they can internalize that. Mm-hmm. But it's not until after they are able to rely on the visual of somebody else having what they think they might be feeling but they're not sure, it becomes solid for them.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I wanted to add to that under-responsive profile is that it could be that you just don't really pick up those cues at all, or it can be that you have a delay in how you process it. So it may not be until after you've had an experience that you kind of relive it, and then you start to understand what it felt like or why you reacted the way you reacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think thinking conversely about a different client, so kind of the client who's sensory over-responsive, and thinking about how that could impact your emotions. So I know we've had a few adult clients who, feel they have those comorbidities of anxiety, panic disorders, OCD maybe even, and it's just a mass confusion of, I'm feeling a lot, and I'm feeling kind of, my senses are all coming in at once. I'm not even able to understand what any of them mean, and everything feels like anxiety when we end up talking about it. And some experiences are just, whoa, I just feel sensitive to this touch sensation, and my touch senses are feeling overstimulated right now, instead of it being stemming from solely a psychological basis, thinking about how do my responses, my over-responsivities to different sensations impact kind of what I perceived my whole life as anxiety, panic, kind of some of those things.
Absolutely. And thinking about how not only is there that internal confusion about where is this stemming from, so I don't know if this is what I ate, I don't know if this is what happened, I don't know if this is what I'm anticipating. There can also be this bleed over into the other people around you, of feeling responsible for other people's emotions because you have that difficulty understanding what's mine and what's yours. So there's an analogy that Carrie and I use a lot with our clients, and we talk about bean bags. So this is just a simple little handheld bean bag, and we talk about how when we have a feeling, when we have a problem, it's our bean bag. And we talk about in our interactions with other people there's sometimes the temptation to give somebody else your beanbag, and there's a temptation to take it. So sometimes it can be done with good meaning, but what happens is when you give away the responsibility for what you're experiencing, what is yours, it actually handicaps you from being able to be responsible for it. And it also puts the other person in an uncomfortable situation. So whether you're someone who tends to give away your beanbag, so to speak, or if you're someone that tends to take them from others, it can create some really unhealthy things that can happen, and it's coming from really that difficulty just figuring out what's mine and what's yours. And so some people that are, like you were saying, really under-responsive tend to be the ones that are like, here, figure this out for me. And then once you have it figured out, then I can move on with my life. If you tend to be over-responsive, you tend to notice all the beanbags in the room around you, and you just gather them, and you don't know what to do with them once you have them, because it gets all mixed in with your beanbags, and you don't know what's yours, you don't know what's the neighbor, you don't know what's the person that checked you out at the grocery store. It can become very, very confusing when you're picking up all of this emotional stuff that you don't know how to interpret, and you don't know how to draw that line between, okay, this is my beanbag, so to speak, and that's your beanbag.
Yeah, I was sitting with a client, one of my adult clients, one day, and we kind of walked through her day and what it looked like, her going to the workplace, and then her going to the grocery store, and then her going home. And what she realized is like, oh, that explains why I'm laying on the couch feeling so burdened by the end of the day. I have this huge bucket of beanbags that I've gathered from people that I don't even know in the community, and I feel like I should take all of their experiences with me. And she just had such a profound experience thinking about that in a way of, wow, I never kind of put those two things together, that I'm just reaching out and taking kind of the experiences from everybody around me and carrying it with me throughout the day.
Yeah, one way that I really like it, that someone put it to me recently, was talking about, so what you perceived of that other person, is that in your head or is that outside of you? So the example that I like to think about is in the car and driving, and someone does something really idiotic in front of you, and it's going to make you respond because you're probably scared, you had to slam on the brakes, you did have to react to it. So part of it was your beanbag of how did I respond to that situation. But a big part of it is that other person is stressed out, in a hurry, something is going on with them. If you find yourself emotionally tuning into what they might be experiencing, you're trying to figure out their beanbag, and it's not your job. And we talk a lot about with our clients about finding those healthy boundaries, help you develop those sensory discrimination skills.
Right.
That can get really confusing when you start to add in those emotional layers. So kind of boiling back to, okay, let's come back to what's yours, what's in your bucket today. What do you have the capacity to handle?
Yeah.
You don't have space for everybody else's stuff.
And thinking about, that stems from understanding what's going on inside your body. Just like what we talked about last week, you have to have a solid foundation of what all those messages mean. And if that's confusing and the outside world is overstimulating, understimulating, or just difficult to understand, it really helps kind of connect those dots.
Yeah. So some of the other things that we do to help people kind of come back into what is their own experience is tuning into your breath, tuning into something internal, whether it's your pulse, if you need to wear a heart monitor to help you know what's you, but doing something that tunes you into something that's your body doing something. And then also talking about what's your physical boundary and what's your personal space boundary. So even just touching your skin and thinking about, this is where I am, this is me here, and being really concrete about it of, this is me and that's somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is where I end and that's where somebody else can begin. And thinking about how close you can feel comfortable to other people. It's going to depend on your relationship with them, how close you can be with them and share that experience with them. But really thinking about boiling it down to, what are the things that are getting in the way of you knowing who you are and why you're responding the way you are when you're struggling with sensory perception. And a lot of that is, okay, we've got to push those beanbags out of your circle for a little bit. We've got to give you some space. That doesn't mean we have to ignore the world around you. It just means you need to create that space so that you can figure out what's going on internally. Then you'll be able to discriminate what's me, what's you.
Yeah, and I think we're really fortunate at STAR to have a mental health team working alongside of us, because this isn't such a simple area, especially once you get into the ages of adolescents and adults. It gets a lot bigger than solely one professional, and so I think one of my big messages would be that this is a really great area to have a multidisciplinary team to be working on this from all angles. I think we are really good at knowing kind of the sensory processing aspect of it, and psychologists play such a great role in kind of knowing some of those emotional and psychological concepts that do end up transforming by the time you get to adolescence and adulthood.
And I think it's so important for those different professionals to play nice, so to speak, because people that come to you for a psychological condition, there may be some sensory problems going on. And I know one of the things that's said in the psychology world is you have to have a felt sense to be able to make progress in psychology. I know that's not everybody in psychology, but a certain part of psychology, they believe that. And I personally believe that if you have sensory discrimination problems, that felt sense is very arbitrary for you. So you may need an occupational therapist to help you figure out what's you and what's not you.
Yeah, so I think this will be some things you'll be talking about at the Sensory Symposium, October 5th.
Yep, that's the parent workshop.
The parent workshop, yes. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so our parent workshop is about relationships across the lifespan with SPD. So it is going to be getting into a lot of this stuff that crosses into the psychology world and where we can kind of come together to support families. I'm going to be talking about adolescents and young adults with Rachel, who is on our mental health team. But then our symposium is going to be full of a lot of different people from around different circles. So we have neuroscientists, we have other occupational therapists, we have educators, we have a lot of different people that are going to come and just contribute to this conversation about sensory processing. It's such an exciting world to be exploring and learning, and there's a lot of new information coming out every day. So hopefully you guys can join us in October, whether it's in person here in Denver or if you want to try and do it remotely. I know that there's going to be some digital ways to get that content as well.
Yeah, so we'll put a link down below in the comments so you guys can have that information.
And for you fellow sensory nerds out there, there's a book that Carrie and I are really excited about right now that's helping reinforce a lot of what we talked about today. And it's not written by an occupational therapist. It is written, I can't remember what her background is. I think she's a neuropsych or something like that. Mm-hmm. But her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she's written a book called How Emotions Are Made. And it's a really, really good book that talks a lot about this from a different perspective, but very much in line with what we are thinking. So.
Thanks, guys. Let us know if you have any questions, as always.